I'll just get this gear off, then we'll talk about the bike. The bike we have here is a Suzuki GS500. Thank you to the bird. A Suzuki GS500. It's not actually 500 cc's, it's actually 487 cc's. It's a parallel twin engine that's air cooled, it's not water cooled. This is a 09 model. It has a 20 litre fuel tank, and I've had a luggage rack put on the back. I'll discuss that one a little bit later. Before we get into some things, down here, some people sometimes think that they've got an oil leak down near the side stand. We'll have a closer look at that now. This is the gear selector of the bike. Now, what happens when you lube the chain, which is there, is the chain goes into this housing here where the front sprocket is, and some of the lube, the hot lube, gets flung off in that front sprocket, and over time it gradually drips down out of the sprocket cover, and it looks like it drips down onto the side stand down here and onto the gear selector. So people mistakenly think that their engine is actually leaking oil when it's not. So just be aware of that. The side stand, as obviously it's not an oil leak, it's what I just explained to you. What we'll do now, following on from the side stand, is we'll have a look at the controls at the front of the bike and how you start it warm and how you start it cold. So we'll start off with the controls at the front. This is what the rider sees on the bike when they're sitting on the saddle. In the case of my bike, I've added a clock and a thermometer in Celsius degrees. They do not come standard with the bike. These were purchased from Clocks for Bikes. The URL I'll put in the information description about this video. On your control panel, you have your mileage up the top, you have a trip meter down the bottom, this is a speedo, you have your tachometer on this side, you have your oil light, neutral, your indicators and your high beams. When the bike is warm, to start the bike, it must be in neutral if the side stand is down. If the side stand is up, then it can be in gear. Suzuki, in their wisdom, have made it a rule on all their bikes that you have to pull the clutch in to start the bike, whether it's in neutral or not. As the bike is warm, I don't need any choke. I pull the clutch in, start the starter button, and the bike starts up. When you start the bike cold, and that doesn't mean the air temperature is cold, that means the engine is cold, the engine first thing in the morning or whatever, you pull the choke on full all the way back here, and then you go through the same motions. You pull the clutch in, you turn the key on, pull the clutch in and start it. Slight little difference, sometimes when the bike's warm you can actually have a little bit of throttle when you start the bike. Tiny little bit of throttle and the bike starts. When the bike is cold, you don't do the throttle at all until the bike is started. I'll show you what I did this morning before I came, how I started the bike cold. We'll have a look at that now. As you can see, I gave a little bit of throttle almost as soon as it was started to get the revs up around 3.5 to 4,000, and I leave it sit like that for about a minute or two. Then I turn the choke halfway or gradually take it off until it comes to about 2,000 on the tacho. Now this bike does not have a fuel gauge, so what we do is after we've filled up, we set the trip meter to 0. So they've just gone to all fours now, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, now they're all at 0. Now the first time you get a bike, I advise to ride until you hit the reserve switch. We'll have a look at that reserve switch now. This is the fuel selection area of the bike. What we have is on. The selector has an arrow pointing down. The thing on the metal says on. This one here says PRI, stands for prime, and the one at the top says reserve. So you leave it in the on position because the bike works with the vacuum system. When the engine is not running, the vacuum turns off and no fuel flows into the carburetors. If you haven't ridden the bike for a while, a week or something like that, or in the case of some of the people in the US where the bike's been in storage, before you ride it, you flick the bike to prime. That bypasses the vacuum system and fuel will fill the carburetors, so it'll be easier to start. If you go to reserve, that also bypasses the vacuum system. Now, it just so happens that when you sit on the bike, I'll just show you now, that you can get your hand onto it. So while you're riding, if you hit reserve, it's a matter of just reaching down just behind your calf and just flicking to up. And then after you've filled up, of course, you make sure you go back down to the on position. It's best to, if you're unsure whether you can do that, it's best to practice while the bike is off, just like I showed you then. Just sit on the bike with the bike off with your foot on the pegs and change it from on to reserve and back, so you have a muscle memory of where the switch is. And then once you've hit reserve, remember how far you were on the trip meter. You go and tank up and reset it. In the case of this bike, anywhere between 300 kilometers and 360 k's, which is about 185 to 220 miles, I'll hit reserve depending on how hard I've been riding the bike. But because I use the trip meter, every time I roughly get to 300 k's, roughly 200 miles, when I get near there, I just go hunting a service station before waiting to hit reserve. The GS500, it comes with a centre stand. A lot of people have trouble putting the centre stand up. There's a very simple technique. Basically, all you do with your foot on the centre stand, you pull the bike up, so you're doing an opposing motion. Now the bike, you can grab the bike in two places. One is here, on this part of the frame. The other is underneath here, where Suzuki has a tie-down strap and bar. You can grab it there. This bike still has the strap, as well as where the luggage rack goes. The method is pretty simple. You hold the handlebars, put the side stand down, get the bike onto both parts of the stand, and then do that motion, and the bike comes up. I'll show you. To get the bike down again, put the side stand up. You can either just push it forward off the stand, or you can sit on the bike, lean back, rock it forward. Either method works. What I do when I tank up, I always do it on the side stand, on the centre stand. That way the tank is level and I can get a more uniform fill in the tank. Now we'll have a look at the luggage system. The rack I have on the bike, it's made by a company called Ventura. They make racks for just about every bike you can think of. The basic frame comes down, bolts up here, and it comes down to a little hex head system here that tightens, and then you tighten this in with the hex nut, which takes this top frame off and on. They make different size frames. I've got the large luggage frame. They make a smaller one which is just a bar. They also make one which is a small bar and a rack like this. When you buy a luggage system from Ventura, you've got a choice of bags. I've chosen the 52 litre bag. How it goes on, you've got these little clips. The bag has a sleeve up here that fits over the upright. These little clips go under the first bar and then come back up and clip on, like so. Now with this particular shaped bag, you'll notice that there's a zipper that runs all the way around from here and another one that comes up from there. If you have two of these bags together, you can actually zip them together. So one bag is here and the other bag is over on that side. Now Ventura recommends not to carry the bag like this because it puts too much weight on it, although most people carry it this way. Ventura suggests you carry the bag this way to keep the weight towards the rider and aid in the stability of the motorcycle. Now, as well as Ventura bags, they make saddle bags as well. You don't have to use Ventura, you can use another brand, whatever you like. And basically, when you set the bike up with a luggage system like this, you turn the bike into a tourer, a mini tourer, and cheap. So you don't need to buy an FJR 1300 or any of the larger capacity bikes. A simple luggage system like this with a Ventura bag or panniers on the side works beautifully. When I take this bike to work, I don't take the Ventura bag. I take my work bag. I simply pop the work bag in the middle here. It sits half on the rack, partly on the grab bar and a little bit on the seat. The bag sits here. And I just have a couple of hockey straps. I just bring them over and cross them over the bag and hook them back onto the rack, and the bag doesn't go anywhere. So that the versatility, I find this is more versatile than a top box or anything like that, because I can take a couple of Ventura bags if I want to, or just leave it as this. So that's the luggage system. Here's a couple of images of people that have also put different luggage systems on their bike to turn their bike into a mini touring bike. Now we'll have a look at underneath the seat to see what kind of storage space you have, or lack of storage space, really, for a better word. The same key that works in the ignition works in the seat lock, which is placed back here. Put the key in, turn it to the right, and the seat pops up. Underneath the seat, we don't have a lot of space here. We have the battery. Now the battery does not have a clamp that goes over the battery like other bikes do. So some people, such as myself, put foam between the battery and the battery box down there just to stop the battery banging around. We have two helmet hooks, one on this side and one on the other. The idea is you put your helmet rings over the hook through here. The helmet dangles down either there or there, and you clamp the seat back down on it. Personally, I take the helmet with me everywhere because I don't trust anyone. And then back here, under this storage spot, we have a couple of elastics and the toolkit that comes with the bike. I'll show you what that toolkit looks like when we're done with this segment. It's a pretty basic toolkit, and a lot of bikes don't have it. So by having a look at the toolkit, you can see what you might need to buy from a parts store. Some people try to put items down the side here, but there is a gap underneath the plastic and they lose items. So you really can't put much down here at all. I can fit a first aid bag in there, and that's about all I ever put in there. I don't have it with me today, but a basic first aid kit goes in there. That's what I put in. So that's the underneath of the seat. To put the seat back on, you simply put the seat forward and press it down, and that's it. It's in place. This is the front of the bike that we're looking at here. fuel tank is back here. This is the horn, and the front wheel is towards that way. This is the frame, and there's a cross member here. And I've mentioned this because this is a naked bike. As you've seen, I don't have any covering fairings. When Suzuki brought out the fairing cut version of this bike, they put an oil cooler just above this frame and just below the horn, somewhere around there. They put an oil cooler, and that's only on the bikes with fairings. So sometimes if a person has crashed a bike with fairings, they don't necessarily need to crash it, but most of the people, the fairings are very expensive to replace, so they go for the option of turning the bike into a naked bike, and they take all the fairings off the bike and they get a round headlight like the naked bikes have. And unless you know, you would think it was just a standard naked bike. So if you see a naked bike and it has an oil cooler around here somewhere, an oil cooler basically looks like a small radiator. It's about that high with little fins going horizontally or perpendicular to the bike's line going across it. It sits about there and it sticks out, and it's got two lines coming down. That's the oil cooler, only on the fairing bike. So if you see a naked bike and it's got an oil cooler, it means it was a fairing bike, and either the bike has been crashed and the previous owner didn't want to fix the fairings, or the previous owner didn't like fairings and removed them. So whether it's crashed or not, it's most likely to have been crashed. And so just keep that in mind if you see a naked bike with oil coolers sitting there, that it most likely was crashed. Not always, but there's a pretty good chance it was. As I've just shown you with the oil cooler on the naked bikes here, you still might not know what it looks like, so here's a couple of photos of them. Well, as you can see, that's what an oil cooler looks like, so it's a lot different to the front of this bike. Now what we'll do is I'll bring you around to this side. I'll just show you a couple of the little things on this side, and then we'll discuss whether this bike is good for learners or not. On this side of the bike we have the brake pedal, which is here for the rear brake. GS500s are notoriously known for having a squeaky rear brake. People have tried putting katana rotors on it and other rotors and anti-squeak on the brake pads, on the metal shim that the piston pushes on the brake pad. Yeah, maybe they work. I've never tried it, and others say that the wheel alignment needs realigning. You can chase your tail trying to get rid of the squeak. Only the GS500s have the squeak, so I call that an optional bonus. Now on this side you have the oil filler cap here. Now when you check the oil on these bikes, it's best to have the bike standing up. At the moment it's on the side, but the idea when you check the oil is you unscrew it, wipe it clean, just sit it down on top like that, and then pull it out again to check the oil. And you can't see this, but that oil is full. So that's all you do to check the oil. You don't screw it in when you check the oil. You just rest it on the threads, pull it out, and take your reading from there. Now, the other thing on this side of the bike is you have these little tubes down here. Now these are air hoses, breather tubes and so on. There is a tube with a cap on the end of it. That tube goes up to the air box, which is underneath the tank. You can actually see the air box if you take the seat off and look that way. You'll see the air filter. That tube goes to the air box. Water, crud, all sorts of hideous stuff gets into the bottom of that air box, and it fills up this tube. If for whatever reason the bike falls over or something happens and this plug comes off or gets a hole in it, then the crud that's in this line from the airbox will fall out, it will come out, and you might think your bike's leaking oil. It isn't necessarily leaking oil, it's just all the crud coming out of this line. So the best thing is to do is every time you change the oil on the bike, just pull the cap off, have a container underneath it and let the crud drain into the container, and put this little cap back on. You of course have a spark plug here and one on the opposite side of the bike. Pillion pegs, your muffler is on this side. I've obviously only just ridden here, but it's pretty cool to the touch. That's because that's a heat-proof casing around the muffler inside, so you're not going to get any heat coming up from the muffler onto the pillions, and your feet don't get too hot either. So that's basically that side of the bike. When it comes to lubing the chain on these, the chains have a pre-lube chain. The O-rings are lubed. So when people talk about lubing the modern chains, the point of the lubrication is so that the chain itself can slide onto the rear and front sprockets easier. That's what a center stand is so good for. So once the bike's on the center stand, you can turn the rear wheel with your hand, with a piece of cloth or something, and while that's turning, with your other hand you can simply spray the lube on to that section of the chain. Always this section, because that's the section that comes up and comes into contact with the sprockets. If you spray it onto the top here, it becomes pointless. So you spray it onto that section from here, and the lube will get onto the sprockets nicely. So that's basically how you lube the chain on these. Just while you're turning the wheel, just point your nozzle in there and spray. Easy as, only takes 30 seconds. People ask me how long. I lube my chain every 1 or 2 tankfuls. Every time I tank up, I come home and I put lube on the chain, and if I miss that one, I definitely do it on the next one. If I've been caught in the rain, riding in the rain, and the bike goes beautifully in the rain, I lube the chain when I get home as well. The lube that I'm using at the moment is called Bel-Ray Super Clean, and I've actually found that's the best lube so far of all the lubes I've tried. As you've seen, the Suzuki 500, GS500 pretty well has everything that a motorcycle needs for a rider. I'm 6'2", so people wonder whether it's good for tall riders or not. When I sit on the bike, I actually find the bike quite comfortable. I have my feet with the peg on the arch, so I can change the gears quite well. On the longer rides, if I'm getting tired, I'll switch to the balls of my feet. For a while, I might raise my leg up just to exercise the calf muscle, and down. I'll put my heel on the bike and point the toes down and up as well to give me some other exercises on the bike. I find the bike quite comfortable. Like I said, I'm 6'2". The riding position is very upright. Some people, such as people that maybe ridden a Kawasaki Z750, on that particular bike the handlebars are much closer and you are feeling that you're right up. And they have told me when they've ridden this bike, they feel like they're leaning quite forward. The position isn't really that much forward at all on this bike. It's quite okay. I've done 39,000 kilometres on this bike, and it has not missed a beat. It's a 09 model. These bikes used to be sold to people with full licenses in my state, in my country. So to ride this, you had to have a full license, and Suzuki was selling them since 1989, so they've been selling quite a lot of them, all to people with full licenses. Now the rules have changed and learners can buy these. So some people think, oh, it's just a learner's bike. Well, it can do 100 miles an hour, 160 kilometers an hour. So it's a little bit more than just a learner's bike. If you have a look at some of my other videos, you can see that it keeps up in the twisties quite well. It might lack a little bit of oomph between the corners, and if you lose a little bit momentum, but otherwise the bike performs beautifully. As far as learners go, it's very forgiving. When you twist the throttle, you don't get a sudden lurch forward, the bike just takes off nicely. So if you accidentally twisted the throttle too hard, you're not going to come to grief with the bike at all. The brakes don't pull you up in a ridiculous fashion, so if you squeeze the brakes too hard, the bike just slows down nicely for you. They'll pull you up quite well if you need to, using the front brake and the rear brake together. The 20-litre tank, like I said, the range on this thing, 200 plus miles, and that's before I hit reserve. Reserve is about a gallon or 4 litres, so you could conceivably get another 50 miles before you actually ran out once you've hit reserve, another 80 kilometres, so it's quite a large tank. And for learners, one of the things with the tank, don't judge it by looking inside of it, judge it by how I told you previously with the trip meter. For learners, the weight of the bike, when you go into corner, the bike almost wants to corner itself. It's just the way the geometry of the bike's set up. The bike feels like it just wants to corner itself, which is really good for learners that might not fully understand the two types of steering on a bike. Below a certain speed, where you point the handlebars is where the bike goes. Above that certain speed, the bike will go straight, and if you were to push a little bit on the left, the bike would actually lean left. And if you pushed a little bit on the right, the bike would actually lean right. And this bike does those two types of steering, direct steering and counter steering. It does them beautifully. Some people complain about the front suspension. I've never had a problem with the front suspension at all. It doesn't bottom out, it's beautiful. This particular bike is made in Spain as a giveaway by this little emblem on the front fork of a motorcycle man. But for learners, it's a very forgiving bike. It really won't get you in too much trouble. The weight's not too bad, the power's beautiful, and if you want to use the bike for commuting or weekend rides, I use it for both. Well, I have used it for both, but with nearly 40,000 clicks on the bike in less than 2 years, I've bought a second bike so I can just keep this to commuting, because if I do a weekend ride, I'll do 500 k's in a day, and that was really starting to rack up, and I really want to keep this bike for a while, so I bought a second bike so I can do the weekend stuff, so that I won't have to get rid of this bike prematurely. 40,000 clicks just about. There's nothing wrong with the engine. I had my mechanic check the valves and they were beautiful. So for a learner's bike, the riding position's good, leg positions are good, the power, the controls, they're not too sensitive, so they're good. The bike is comfy to ride, like I said, 500 k's, 300 miles, and the seat is fine. It's just a darn good bike, whether you're a learner or experienced rider alike. Well, that's the GS500, my GS500, the naked version. If you have any other questions about the bike, please post them in the comments section below the video. Otherwise, I say go get yourself one. They're a whole heap of fun. I'll see you next time.